about questions today. I've been thinking about questions all week, and it's an odd thing. I get an idea in my mind, and then I start bumping into it everywhere. People mentioning it or reading things about it. So thinking about questions, I remembered this funny story about Albert Einstein. Some of you might have heard it before, where he was going to a kind of a science convention. He was going to give a speech, and he'd been doing so many of these. He'd just done so many. He was just tired of hearing himself talk, so he was complaining to his driver on the way. I'm so tired of giving these speeches. It's just, it's the same thing over and over again. And the driver agreed, and he said, well, you're right. I've heard it so many times, I could do that speech. So Einstein said, that's a terrific idea. Let's switch places. Have you heard this story? Let's switch places. So he goes to the speech, he shows up, they change the clothes so that the driver looks like Einstein, and Einstein looks like the driver, and Einstein plops down in the front row to just enjoy, and the driver gets up to do the speech, and he's going along pretty good until they do questions. And then somebody in the audience, some really puffed up astrophysicist who knew a whole lot, decided to try to intimidate Einstein and ask this really, really difficult question. Really complicated question. Everybody in the crowd was like, oh, what's going to be the answer to that? And driver, who's looking like Einstein up front, said, that question is so simple. It's so very simple. In fact, I'm going to let my driver answer it for you. It was a good question, apparently, a very good question. And that's what I kind of wanted to share some reflections about today, about the importance of questions, especially good questions, beautiful questions. Albert Einstein apparently was quoted as saying that one of the secrets of his success, he said, was, I was always a little retarded. Never stopped asking the simplest of questions. What am I? Why am I here? Is there a God? What is the purpose of the universe? Deep, constant questioning was behind all those discoveries in his life, all those, the theory of relativity and everything else that his discoveries led him to. Questions, so important. All the great philosophers, I think, and teachers have demonstrated that. We all know Socrates, what was called a Socratic method of questioning, which was really sort of the father of Western philosophy. The secret of it was questions. Keep asking questions. Start with a question like, what is virtue? And then follow it with more questions, and that's how you get deeper and deeper answers. Questions are an important part of, I think, all spiritual traditions. I was thinking about in Eastern spiritual traditions, Zen tradition, I think especially, the koans. What is the sound of one hand clapping? I always like that one. A koan, that's a question that's meant to, in your spiritual practice, as you wrestle with these unanswerable questions, it's supposed to guide you toward a breakthrough in your mind, so you're not so trapped into rational thinking. Your mind opens up to wider possibilities. Another one was, what was your face before you were born? Whoa! It's supposed to blow your mind in some way, as we used to say back in the 60s. Questions to kind of break us open a little bit, bring new insight, bring new discoveries. Jesus taught with questions all the time. If you kind of just flip through the Gospels, you'll see question after question. It seemed to be how he engaged with people, how he guided and taught and healed people and helped people discover their own blocks and things that might be in their way so that they can be healed. What are you looking for? He said to the disciples. Who do you say that I am? Why do you ask me what is good? What do you want me to do for you? Do you want to be made well? Deep questions must have really pulled at people, pulled answers and discoveries out of them. I think there's a tremendous power in questions, and I think we've all experienced in our lives. We talk a lot in Unity about the law of attraction, that there's just sort of this law by which things are attracted to us. There's a kind of radiating energy that we send out by our questions and by our expectations. That's how they come to us. They draw forth answers. Our questions draw forth answers from the universe, taking us to a deeper understanding of who we are, of what we're dealing with, and how we're doing. I was thinking of kind of a contemporary metaphor for the law of attraction, which is kind of a phrase we use in unity circles. A good metaphor for it is sort of how social media works nowadays. I didn't understand earlier on in things like Facebook that if you demonstrate your interests or your questions by logging into certain things, all of a sudden a whole lot more of that will show up. Am I right? Yeah. It's a kind of law of attraction at work in the social media world. So if you're interested in lovely pictures of puppies and kittens, and you start looking at some, you're going to be deluged with kind of lovely pictures of puppies and kittens. Or it could be other things. It could be unpleasant things. It could be hate things. It could be stories of suffering. It could be bad news. Whatever we're kind of inviting in, the universe through the social media will provide more of it. It's the same way in our lives. I think life works the very same way. What we are putting out there, the universe will give more of same by the law of attraction. Questioning is a powerful invitation to the universe. If we put out a deep question into the universe, it's like an invite that the universe will respond to. I think children, all of us as children, understand intuitively the power of questions and how important it is to their growth. Do you remember how many questions you asked when you were a kid? It's just so basic to all of us. I remember that, just deep, deep questions. You know, who am I? Why am I here? What is that? What's that for? You know, why? Lots and lots of questions that are very difficult to answer. And children are very comfortable with that. And they know there's a lot of things they don't have the answers for yet, and that's okay. That's how life is. There's a lot of things we don't have answers for yet. So we keep asking our questions. We keep putting it out there. And the universe keeps responding. We adults have more trouble with questions. And I think it's because of our egos, as they sort of get built up in us as we move toward adulthood. Our egos want security and certainty. We want to nail things down. We don't want a lot of unanswered questions. It's confusing, it makes us insecure, it makes us fearful. But of course, life is always vaster than we can grasp. There's always so many more possibilities than we can imagine. We need to stay open at the top, is how they used to describe it about the Fillmores, open at the top with questions and inquiries. That's what's going to bring more answers and more discoveries into our lives and keep our minds open and expanding. It's really a kind of a spiritual capability required of all of us to be able to ask questions, deep questions, and to be comfortable with unanswered ones for a while, for maybe all our lives. It's in the nature of things. I was an English major way back, as many of you know, and one of my favorite poets, John Keats, talked about this quality as negative capability. Negative capability, and he defined it as being capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. I've been in that irritable place, haven't you? I've got to have answers here, and I have to have them now. And usually when I've been in that place trying to rush or force answers, they have led me in the wrong direction. They have been too hurried a choice. They have not been a God-guided choice. We have to be capable of being in uncertainty a lot in life, wouldn't you agree? It happens pretty often. When things are uncertain, we're in between, we're in transition, or we just don't quite know what we're supposed to be doing right now, what's ours to do, and we have to be able to dwell in that uncertain place for a while. It can be uncomfortable, yes? But it's also on the edge of life, and we are wide open to discoveries when we are in that place and when we can allow ourselves to be there. How many of you have experienced an extended time of uncertainty? Every hand in the room. It suddenly occurred to me, this is such a basic of the human condition, and yet we struggle with it. It's the only way to really navigate through life in a God-guided way is by staying open to that uncertainty and to those questions, to live our questions is the way the poet Rainer Maria Rilke put it, to live our questions. Well, this is one of my favorite passages, I think, of all times. Any of you ever read Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke? It's a wonderful little book of advice from an older man to a younger man about love and life and dealing with questions. This is what he has to say. Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps then, someday far in the future, you will gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answers. I love that. We live our way into the answers. That's not something you can push. That's not something somebody else can give you. That's something that's going to come to you. As you live your questions, you keep asking them and following the guidance as it comes to you day by day. What kind of questions are the most powerful questions? I stumbled on a quote from somebody else talking about the power of beautiful questions to create beautiful lives, and I started thinking about that. What makes for a beautiful question? Krista Tippett, she has a podcast called On Being. It's a wonderful program. She talks about the discipline of asking beautiful questions. It's one of the great disciplines of a human life, she said. A beautiful question starts to shape your identity. You don't have to do anything about it. You just have to keep asking. And before you know it, you will find yourself actually shaping a different life, meeting different people, finding conversations that are leading you in those directions that you wouldn't even have seen before. Leading you, our questions lead us toward new people, new identities, new lives. Questions kind of elicit answers, they draw them forth. And when we ask deep questions, we get deep answers. And we get guidance in really powerful ways that we find our life changing. There's lots of examples of this around. I've been recently, I think I mentioned him last week, I've been thinking a lot again about Baba Ram Dass because he passed last month. And he was a kind of a spiritual way shower for a lot of us old hippies, and maybe some others besides. His book, Be Here Now, back in '71. One of the earliest, I think the very first book I read by him was actually a book called How Can I Help? Some of you might have read that book. It was an early book he wrote. It was about service, doing service in the world, being a helper in the world, and really inquiring about that. How do we do that? How can I help? It was a book that many, many people responded to, people in any kind of social work or in ministry or teaching or helping professions or healing professions. How can I help? How can I help and not get drained? How can I help and know it's not ego helping, or I'm on some ego trip, but it's a real authentic helping? How do I know what's mine to do as a helper and not someone else's? How can I help? Deep questions that led Ram Dass in a life of great service. The answers came to him. The people he met came to him as a result of that deep question. How can I help? Brought answers, brought people into his life, brought a stronger sense of identity. His name, Ram Dass, means servant of God. A deeper identity as one who serves God by serving others, formed in him, and through him for many others who were guided in that work. I think that's kind of the thing that Tippett was talking about, that questions, beautiful questions, shape a beautiful life. As we live those questions, how can I help? It creates a life of service, a life of guidance and how to do that well. I'm reading another book of his right now that I've not read before called Still Here. Still Here. It's a book about aging. And the questions in it are, how can I age consciously? How can I age beautifully? How can I age in a way that will be a blessing to my loved ones and to the world? How can I age with wisdom and grace in a culture that doesn't respect elders and the wisdom of elders? These are the kind of the deep questions of that book and what it led to, a book that's inspired many others. I thought again about Eckhart Tolle. How many of you have read some of Eckhart Tolle's work? The Power of Now was the big one, I think, and it was triggered by a question. The whole thing was triggered by a deep question, a beautiful question. He had been plagued with depression for his whole life, as he describes it. Plagued by anxiety and depression. And it reached a pinnacle one day, and he found himself thinking, found himself feeling suicidal and thinking to himself, I can't live with myself any longer. And then all of a sudden it just came to him to question that, who is this I that can't live with me? Are there two I's? You know, the I that's suffering depression and the I that's observing the one that's suffering the depression? Who am I there? It triggered the whole book, that question. Who is this I? Who is the real I, the true I? It led to the book, The Power of Now, which was the end of his problems with anxiety and depression, and it became a book that inspired many, many other people to find a way out of the pain and the misery they were suffering because of being in the past or anxious about the future. The power was now, right here in the present. Wow, that's a wonderful example of a beautiful question that shaped a beautiful life and moved it toward greater wisdom and wholeness that was a blessing to everyone else as well. I think this happens to all of us. In all of our lives, if we thought about it, I think we could all come up with a time when we had a deep question in our minds and it led us somewhere. It led us toward healing, toward guidance, as we lived with it and lived our way into answers. I was thinking of a time in my life, it was the year, my parents both died with the same year of different illnesses, and it was a difficult year, and my mother's death was particularly difficult and painful, a lot of hospital time and so on. And the months following their deaths, I did a lot of healing work, just sort of following guidance that came. Massage therapist was suggested, a counselor, a grief counselor that I was connected with. Feeling my way, a time of deep confusion and insecurity, uncertainty, lots of deep questions, lots of questions. But one day I was dealing with a fair amount of pain. They called it fibromyalgia at the time. So I was going to a massage therapist, and one afternoon with a massage therapist I said, what do you think I need to do to be able to just heal this condition for good? And she said, build a life you love. Build a life you love. And that triggered a deep question in me. What would that life look like? What would that life look like for you? What would your beautiful life look like? That's a deep question. That's a beautiful question. And it leads to a lot of discoveries, as it did for me. As I lived that question, I began to be healed, to find, to be drawn to law of attraction, radiating, began to draw to myself healing resources, new friends, new opportunities, new communities, new work, new writing work, new speaking or teaching work. A deep question leads you in a powerful direction. It brings answers from the universe. So I think those are, and there are questions we all have in our hearts. Sometimes we forget to ask them, like we think there's no purpose to it. There's a powerful purpose to asking our questions and living with them day after day and not rushing for solutions or ways to pin it down or fix it, but let it be uncertain. Let yourself live with them. Even love those questions, like mysteries to be unlocked, like books you haven't, in a foreign tongue you're learning to read, as Rilke says. Questions draw forth from the invisible essence. They're powerful. So we want to ask big questions, beautiful questions. Like poet Mary Oliver, any of you ever read Mary Oliver poetry? She said, tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and beautiful life? I love that line. One wild and beautiful life. What do you plan to do with it? I think we'll kind of close with a meditation like that. Asking those questions. Jesus said, ask and it will be given you. Asking those deep questions brings forth deep answers and deep guidance and deep nourishment for our souls. So we want to think about what are the deepest questions of our hearts. What is the deepest question of your heart right now? About how you want to live your life, about what your beautiful life looks like, about what might be in the way that you might want to to clear out of the way so that you can experience more of that adventure and that joy and that beauty. So we're going to reflect on that in a closing meditation, all right? Let's just close our eyes for a moment and draw our attention inward, affirm our truth, our deepest truth, that we know we are deeply God-connected. The power and presence of God is with us, deep within us, and all around us, and is always responding to us, always responding to the needs of our hearts and minds, always responding to our questions, always bringing us answers, guidance, always seeking to uplift us and lead us in the path of life and joy and peace. So we give ourselves permission to ask the deepest questions of our hearts in this moment. Who am I? What is mine to do? What is the work God has given me to do? What is in the way of the work I'm meant to do, the life I'm meant to live? I am ready to move forward into greater fullness of life, ready to be centered in peace and power and life abundant. What is the beautiful life you are calling me to, God? We listen for a moment in the silence. As we begin to come out of this quiet moment, we let those questions continue to rise up in us. We let ourselves live with them, continue to ask them. Our big, our beautiful questions. We let them be an invitation to the universe to bring us greater life, greater wisdom and insight, to lead us forward in the path of life and great joy and freedom. Thank you, God, for your unfailing presence with us, now and always. Amen.